Hello and welcome to Lines and Spaces. I'm Jason.
And I'm Michaela. Today we're going to talk about a topic that is known to a lot of people, especially a lot of music educators and teachers, and students, especially music educators, studying in school right now. And Jason, what is that topic?
So today's topic is called imposter syndrome, or also known as imposter phenomenon. And like the word kind of states, it is the feeling of feeling like an imposter or phony in your field of study. And this idea that you are a fraud and also having a fear of being exposed as somebody who isn't qualified to be doing what they're doing. And like Michaela had mentioned, it affects individuals who are music educators and musicians to varying degrees of study, and especially like Michaela and I, we are recent graduates from college, so we're facing a little bit of that feeling of like we have our jobs lined up for next fall and just not really knowing like, oh, what are we doing right now? But Michaela, but besides us, who else is affected by imposter syndrome?
Well, Jason, I don't know if you can hear, but my dog I think is affected by it. And outside of my dog, it's something that can affect pretty much anybody doing anything. I know. Um, and especially, I think, as you mentioned, people in academia or in creative fields. Um, yeah. And it's also probably affects more people who are underrepresented or disadvantaged in some way, shape, or form. Just
Mhm.
anybody who might feel like they're um, undeserving or have not earned uh, their place in what they do.
Yeah. So yeah, it affects everybody, and for us, we're mainly going to focus on the sides of educators and being a musician in the field, because that is what we're focused on in this podcast. So, Michaela, what are some ways that you've kind of experienced imposter syndrome, like I guess throughout your life?
Great question. So I know that that's definitely something I've experienced at least like little doses of various different times. And even now, as Jason mentioned before, as we're, in the summer before starting our full time teaching positions, that's definitely something that I've been experiencing at least a little bit of. And just thinking, like, oh my goodness, there's so many people that are so qualified to do the things that I'm now going to have the opportunity to do. And yeah, it's a little challenging in my experience, and I would imagine for a lot of people. But we're also going to talk some more about how to deal with it. But before we do that, Jason, how have you experienced it in your life?
Um, so besides like in recent, like these past few months, kind of coming from graduation and everything, I felt imposter syndrome kind of right off the bat coming into music education. I think we spoke about this before. I was originally studying biochem and transferred into music education while during my freshman year, and it definitely felt like I was very behind in a lot of things because I didn't have the training and whatnot coming in. And even though as I progressed through my time at school and everything, I was making a lot of achievements and learning a lot of things, but all of this kind of didn't feel quite right just because I was like, oh, this stuff is happening and I don't know why or for whatever reason it feels like I'm getting through all these classes out of luck and like, oh, I'm glad that it landed on this day or this happened or I didn't screw up here because I would have and just not feeling like any of my achievements, this is mainly freshman sophomore year, my achievements felt like they were deserved, and a lot of times it just really just felt like everything kind of just lined up perfectly and it just happened in a way. And especially in like the recent months, like Michaela had mentioned, coming out of graduation, going into college, with school ended and everything, and just looking ahead, the next step is starting that full-time teaching position. I've had more and more like moments of like doubt where I don't feel like the things that I'm doing are enough, and that if I take any moment to rest, I'm falling behind my peers and everything. And like Michaela mentioned, you're in university, looking, studying this field that is so like grand and so big with all these amazing peers, different professors and different educators, and you have the opportunity to work with a lot of great mentors and everything. And here you are, this undergraduate student just coming in and, trying to learn everything from this field and feeling like you haven't learned enough and whatnot. Though we've had a fair amount of training, it always just feels like he could do more. And that idea of not never being quite satisfied or accepting of your successes, and that has definitely affected me a lot throughout my time in college. And I'm curious, Michaela, if that kind of feeling, because I know you came from music theater into music education, that if it felt like you weren't, that it was like, what am I doing here?
I mean, yeah, like I came into this and I was like, I kind of know what the staff is and that there are notes on it. And I had like a general idea of like what music notes on the page were, and like every good boy does fine, like I knew that. Um, and I had like a general sense of how sight reading worked. Um, but yeah, that's definitely something, and I know that that's something I struggled with. It kind of came in waves throughout my entire time uh, in college, and there's always an excuse. Like there's always a reason that you can come up with for like, oh, well, like I'm not here because of skill. Like I'm here because blank. Like because I was standing there at the right time.
Mhm,
Because I got off on like a good impression and that
mhm.
kind of thing. There's so many reasons that you could give yourself, but first of all, if you do, you're not alone. I think most people do that to some degree.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think it also has a lot to do with, for me anyway, um, like how I'm measuring the type of person I am. On like a
Mhm.
personal note, is my worth determined by the amount of things that I've done well, or by how hard I'm working to get better? Um, and that's the most important thing, I think, is really trying to improve and knowing that if you're giving it all you've got, that's everything you can do, and you're not an imposter if you're just trying to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And there's something that I kind of through our readings that we did for this type of subject, this idea of conditional worth, where you view your achievements and your success based on how others see what you've achieved and what you've succeeded in, and that's definitely something that has affected me a lot, especially growing up, wanting to for others to see what I've done, and that being the measurement of how well I'm doing in the field, and that idea of kind of, I mean, getting praise is always good, but that attention to like oh, I did this thing yet nobody noticed. Did I actually do it? Which is another weird type of concept, but
If a
conditional
tree
worth
falls,
in the woods. Did it really fall at all? Yeah. And it's it's something that I think a lot of us, especially musicians who have been practicing music for very since we were very young, kind of going up into studying in college or higher education levels, where you probably are very used to after performing a concert, everybody's like, "Oh my God, you were so great up there! You were amazing!" And that's great. It's always great to have those type of compliments, but it definitely builds this idea of sometimes, especially with younger musicians, they seek that where they don't believe they're doing enough if they don't get that type of like praise or people aren't seeing that they're doing this type of work. And it definitely affected me a fair amount in kind of switching over into kind of the music world was am I really performing to the same degree that I should be as my peers if I don't post me myself performing where I don't people aren't seeing me perform? Am I really actually achieving anything? And like Michaela said, you just have to judge it off of yourself. Kind of accept that you are who you are, and we're all everybody in the field of music is trying to reach a goal, and we have to do everything we can to kind of reach that best self that we're kind of looking for, and judging based off of yourself and not based off of others, which is something that you really have to sit down with and just kind of think about as you're doing your studies and taking that time off to kind of sit back and think about, oh, I'm doing X, Y, and Z things, and I should be happy that I was able to do all these things within the given amount of time, and just accepting your success in that moment, which I think is very important as well. And I'm curious, Michaela, just in terms of like um this idea of like imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon. Have you ever, like you mentioned like peers and whatnot, but were there any moments of like intimidation where like you were kind of in like the field and you just felt like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing here?
Yeah, the most actually, I think most starting moments I've felt that. And there have been a lot of high stress situations in which I was thinking, how did I get here? Why did this happen? And what gives me the right to be here at this moment? Um, and I know that a lot of the people around me have kind of felt that way, and there's different degrees of it. Like we're all critical of ourselves in some way, shape, or form, especially in performance contexts, as musicians, as teachers, as human beings, and to a degree, it's important to go back and reflect on what we've done, the way in which we did it, how it worked, so that we can just continue to improve.
Mhm,
It becomes um, a little bit more problematic when you start to kind of like obsess, or like you kind of start to spiral into like um, these like crazy thoughts that simply are not true. Like I
mhm.
don't deserve this. Like I don't deserve to be here. Those are kind of when it starts to um, the light goes from yellow to red. Like that's
Yeah. Hmm.
not a super healthy thing. And yeah, I think like we've probably all experienced at least some degree of being really critical of ourselves in different situations. Like, oh, that performance, like I did that part wrong. I knew I was going to do it wrong. I do it wrong every time. And then like maybe like try to end it there. But I'm going to do better next time instead of continuing on to those negative and hurtful thoughts of like, well, I am nothing and don't deserve to be here, because that's just not true. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so like my experience with it is um, it's more so like these moments of like, what am I doing here? Like I don't know what I'm doing. What, like, why was I picked to be in this situation at this time?
Hmm.
And that's totally normal and that's totally natural. Uh, but kind of diving into our last point of what we can do about it, um, we can't control what happens a lot of the time. We can't control a lot of things, but we can control how we think and what our attitude is about things. So, kind of just changing your habits and changing the way you think is really, really helpful. And of course, I'm one to talk because I still don't do this as much as I should. But um, something that we read in some of our research was that it's important to build healthier habits. Um, and you can be critical and you can be reflective, but put it into the actionable, into what can I do to improve this, instead of giving like labeling yourself with things that aren't really helpful and are not necessary. But Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That building those healthy habits, and of course, I think like Michaela mentioned, it's something that I am also I'm currently struggling, not currently, but like have been struggling with is like recognizing my habits but not taking actions to kind of improve them as much as I could. Um, and yeah, it comes down to how you're thinking about it. Taking that time to sit back and reflect on your achievements and being like, oh, I deserve that. Like what I did here was something that was important and that was great and whatnot. And then just recognizing that sometimes it's okay to just be like that you've earned something and you're good enough in that situation, because like you can make, like we've made plenty of mistakes in our teachings, especially our first couple like earlier teachings in our career where we made mistakes and it affected, and we had to sit down and reflect like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, or I said that, or what was I even thinking at that moment. And just taking the time to recognize that you're at different levels. Like you're seeing your peers teach, you're seeing your colleagues teach, and you're seeing your professors even teach in class, and you're like, oh my God, how am I ever gonna get there? And just recognizing that they all started there. Every educator, every musician started at a point similar to where you were at, and it takes time to build and develop. And getting into the habit of thinking about it as like a growth mentality, like, oh, I can get there type of thing, or oh, if I, like we're, different. What's the saying? Different strokes for different
Different
folks.
strokes, yeah, for different
Yeah, so there's
folks.
different paths to get to all different points in life, and just recognizing that. And something that it is very important is talking with other people. The great thing about having kind of this podcast and the relationship that me and Michaela have is just being able to talk to somebody who's very like-minded and thinking about music education, and just like kind of talking about like and just recognizing like, oh, I'm not alone in this boat. Like I'm not the only one struggling to work through these things, and talking with your friends and family about things going on and things that you've done, and just having that kind of community to share with your colleagues or your friends or your families, your peers and your mentors,
Yeah,
like
and if
that.
I could add on to that,
Of course.
like I know that when I say things that are just completely out there, I know like when I'm talking to Jason, he can call me out and be like, "That's just not true." And so, kind of getting into the habit of being really honest with yourself and honest with the people you care about, and just considering like, okay, well, why am I being like, why am I saying these things? Why am I thinking these things? And taking a little bit of time for yourself, reflection is huge. I know we've talked a little bit about that before, but it's so important to like take a few moments and reflect. If you are currently studying music education in college, perhaps you're at a point where you're doing that thing where your professors are like, record your teachings, and you're like, why? And then you have to go back and reflect on it over and over again. Um, that's a really, really, I cannot stress enough how useful that tool is in everyday life, in teaching, in your musicianship, but also being honest about it, not just tearing yourself apart for no reason at
Mhm.
all, but being constructive with your criticism, because you should be able to look objectively at the things you've done in some way, not completely objectively because you are
Mhm.
still a human being, but to be honest and think, okay, this is what I would like to do better at. How am I going to do it? And then you can talk to the people around you, and you can talk to your friends and family, talk to colleagues,
Mhm.
ask for advice, ask for honest opinions, and take everything as an opportunity to grow rather than a reason to stop.
Yeah. That's something that imposter syndrome kind of falls into as well, as not being able to, you taking criticism a bit too like harsh, like you're like, oh my god, they said this, I'm not great, like I can't do this, and just like that's when you start spiraling, like when you
Yeah,
get those feedback things and you're not taking it with the same type of grain of thought. Because there have been many times where I've gotten feedback where I felt like, oh my god, I completely just messed that up. But also taking time to recognize like what you did well or how you prepared for it. And sometimes these things just happen. I remember I did a teaching early on for general music, or at one of our externship classes, and I completely just like blew that first in like that teaching with my peer. It's like a peer teaching, so I was teaching other colleagues of mine. I forgot the lyrics and just nothing was functioning, but I had to get through it. And then once I had it down a little bit, like the last 2 minutes of my time up there, I achieved something. It wasn't what I planned to achieve, but I got something out of it. And I remember the feedback that I got from it was like it was definitely like it was really honest and really down to earth, and I took it very honestly. Like, yeah, I could have done more to do this, but I'm glad that I was able to recognize when I was doing the teaching that like, oh my God, this is falling apart, and then recognizing that things weren't going right, but then trying to flip it on itself and just still finishing up with a product, even though it wasn't what I had originally planned for. And just taking those like small victories one step at a time, taking it slow, I think is very important as well. And you could kind of throw that up to like luck, like, oh my God, I'm so glad that happened or something like that. And I definitely felt moments where luck was like, oh my God, I can't believe I got that position. It must be because it was just like that right day type of thing. But then when I think about that, I'm like, well, even though that opened the door, maybe luck opened the door for this opportunity, but I still had to walk through the door. Like I still had to do the walking and do all the stuff to get to the other side of that and finish out whatever thing the opportunity was. And yeah, and I also can't stress enough, don't compare yourself to others. Like you can have role models like musicians and whatnot, and you can see them on social media and whatnot to like compare yourself. Like, oh my God, they're doing such great things. Wow, that's amazing. But you should never compare yourself to them. Like, oh my God, I can't. I'll never get
yeah.
to that point.
Like if I sat here and, watched Jason play any number of instruments, as he can play very many of them, and thought like, oh my gosh, I am lucky if I know which end to put my mouth on. Not, I'm a little better than that, but like, like it would be crazy for me to compare myself to what he can do because he's an instrumentalist far more than I am. Like, and I can, however, compare where I started to where I am now, which is just light years of difference. Um, and it's also important to note that imposter syndrome is not a psychological condition. It can, however, contribute to other things like depression and things that can continue to really grow and just not be good for you.
Yeah.
So it is something that a lot of the time you can have a say over. Again, in those habits, and there's a lot of exceptions, but um, you can work on these types of habits to help yourself. And like Jason was saying, he had an experience where he was able to take really honest feedback, and I think that starts with how you see yourself, what you think of yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and that's just kind of a general life thing. If you're cool with yourself, if you're cool with who you are and what you're doing, it'll be much easier to take whatever type of criticism. And that's not to say that all the time you look in the mirror and you're like, I like you, because nobody does that.
Well, if you
But
can speak for yourself, Michaela, I look in the mirror every morning. I'm like, Jason, you're right on.
looking good, champ. um, but to be patient with yourself and to be able to find what's good in you and what you can offer, and to keep that in mind as you're growing, as you're adapting and taking on this growth mindset, to be patient with yourself. And
Yeah.
as it's important to know like what things you struggle with, but it's also important to know what you bring to the table and what you have to
Hmm.
offer. So the more you can keep that in mind, the easier it'll be to take feedback and the easier it'll be to grow without falling into a damaging state of mind.
Yeah. And something that just kind of to kind of go off of what Michaela is mentioning, something that I've been doing a lot more is keeping goals for myself. Like I had mentioned, taking small steps to achieve things. And if you plan out your goals, like short-term or long-term goals, as much as you can, it kind of helps you see like where you started and where you're at, especially if you follow through with those goals. And that gives you an idea like, oh, I achieved that. Like I started here and then I got to this point, and then however that affects you, it's a great way to measure how that you can see that growth and that you deserve that type of thing. And something that is kind of interesting that I kind of read was this is kind of like a more like teacher to student or like mentor to mentee,
Mentee,
yeah, type of thing. Is labeling like the idea
yeah.
like a lot of times I'm sure people have grown up like, oh my god, that's the musical kid, or like, oh my god, that's the kid who draws really well or something like that. And I don't, and as an educator trying to get away from giving those type of comments, like they're great, like it's great, you definitely give praise where praise is due, but there have been many times where that praise that is very like almost superficial. I don't want to say super superficial, but like let's say you have a student in your classroom who is like who is doing really well, and you're like, oh my god, you're so great at flute, yeah, well you're light years beyond your other colleagues, that type of thing. Like saying that to a student gives them expectations like, oh my god, I'm good at this thing, therefore I have to keep achieving higher and higher. And that has definitely been something that I had to deal with, how dealt with. I guess I dealt with and I
You
also
dealt
deal with.
with or you
Yeah,
have to deal with, yeah.
yeah, a lot. Going through high school, like I was told, like there were not a lot of tuba players in my high school, and I was started for sophomore year was okay, and I got like a lot of nice comments, and but at that point, it was like whenever I made a mistake, I just felt like, oh my god, I let everybody down because I'm supposed to be good at this thing. And that's and then coming and then just thinking about that, and then even now what I am, I dropped something. What I am fully teaching now, and like working with students who are young and also students who are in high school thinking about going into college, is recognizing how what I'm saying to them, and being making sure that what I'm saying to them is good feedback, and when I do praise them, that it is coming from a space of like Um, Something that's more tangible than being like, oh, you're really great at trombone.
Yeah, you got to give people a reason. Like you have to be really clear and specific in your feedback you give to other people and to yourself.
Yeah,
And something that um, advice that was given to me by one of my placement teachers for student teaching was to comment first on what they're doing, not the product they are creating.
yeah,
So if students are really singing out, and I really want them to be singing out, it would be more effective if I told them that they were doing a wonderful job of sitting with their shoulders back and using their diaphragm and really projecting their sound forward rather than that sounded so much better than like it did the first time. You really did a much better job. It sounds great. Instead, I'm commenting on their behavior. What they really do have more control over is the thing that I'm asking them to try to control, just like you could do
mhm,
with yourself. You can't say, I want to sing this better, I want to play this better, because it didn't sound good. Why didn't it sound good? You know, quote
mhm,
unquote good, whatever that is to you. Um, Being really specific. And as Jason's mentioned several times, that growth mindset is huge. So
mhm.
if you can take that on for yourself, you can take that on for your students and for the other people you interact with. And as we mentioned before, there's so many things in life you cannot control. You can, however, control your own actions, your attitudes, and your thoughts. So when you want to improve upon something, aim there first. Aim
Mhm.
at your habits, the things that you do have a say in.
Mhm. Yeah. And just kind of like going back to our original topic of like imposter syndrome and imposter phenomenon, like Michaela and I have mentioned, it affects everybody. And
Yeah.
you aren't alone in thinking that especially in these fields of creative arts and like higher level academia, it it can get hard to feel like it can sorry, not hard. It can be hard to recognize that like you aren't alone because you're focused on something that is so uniquely yours. You know, like in the field of art, you want to make your voice in art, music, or you know, physical drawings or anything like that, your own, and it's hard to see kind of that clearly if you're constantly thinking that you don't deserve to be there. Because in most times, I mean, you always, I mean, the field of art, everybody deserves to be there. There isn't any like, there
It's
shouldn't
meant
be
for
any,
everybody.
yeah, there shouldn't be like a barrier of entry. Like you have to achieve this level to be this thing because like I clearly did not have that under my belt. Never won a solo competition or anything like that. But I'm still here, like, and I and I enjoy what I do. And I think that's the biggest thing is find the enjoyment, find those little moments in the times that you're practicing the thing that you love to do, and just sit there for a little bit. Like you played a phenomenal B flat scale. You had never played a B flat
Woo!
scale before, and you did it. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And think about how much like where you were when you first started playing that B flat scale to where you are at like the end of the year or something, and how much better that sounds. And kind of measuring those things out, just being honest with yourself that you made that achievement happen. Because like there are a lot of like Michaela mentioned, you can't control a lot of things, but you can control how you practice, how you think about yourself, and how you present yourself to others. And that is definitely what like opens those doors to bigger and better possibilities. Just how you think about yourself and being honest and critical when you need to be, but taking the time to just sit there and be like, I can't believe I did that, and that was like I did that, and
Yeah.
just sharing and also sharing your successes. You know, feel you should be happy to share things that you achieved. You know, whether that's getting into like school, finding a new job, or anything like that in between, or even just like, oh my God, I can't believe I played the oboe today, which to me is an instrument that is very foreign to me. Like I could play a note on the oboe. Just like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, and just feeling happy for yourself in those moments of need because, like Michaela had mentioned, it is not so much a like it's not in this imposter syndrome isn't on the same degree as like depression or anything like that. It is a construct that we kind of create for ourselves that can lead to stress,
Yeah.
anxiety, and depression. Um, but it's something that we have a little bit more control over. And it really just comes down to how you kind of present yourself. And I think Michaela stated it nicely about your actions and how you what you do to kind of combat it and how you think about those
Yeah.
things as well.
And Jason, I have a parting 2 cents to give.
Always good.
This is something that I know I've been trying to tell myself more recently, and maybe it's something you need to hear too, since you're listening. Um, Life generally is not easy. I think if we somehow didn't know that before this year, we've all learned it.
Mm,
And it's likely that life will never really be easy, nor should it be, because what fun is that? Um, However, adapting that or taking on that growth mindset is really important. And also, since we already know life's not really going to be easy and things aren't going to run smoothly most of the time, I know for me, I'm trying to do a better job of being joyful anyway. But like finding the reasons and the ways to be happy when things aren't going the way I wanted or when things are not what I thought they were supposed to be, or even when I'm not where I thought I was supposed to be. It's finding a reason to be joyful because since the bulk of our lives is not going to go the way we plan in some way or another, it's good to be able to look back and see that you were joyful anyway, that you enjoyed the time that you have, and that you were able to create with people and to interact with other human beings, your students, your colleagues, and just remembering that you only need to improve from where you were yesterday, or you need to be trying to do that. You don't need I don't need to be Jason 2.0 because I cannot be. Um, you just need to be growing for yourself. Be better than you were yesterday
mm,
in your thoughts, in your words, and in how you think about things.
yeah. And likewise, I definitely cannot sing as well as
Mm.
Michaela has sung many times before. And her ability to orally transpose music is a skill that I'm still working on. It's gotten better, but I definitely cannot play from ear very well. But yeah, see, we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and as Michaela said, sometimes it's just being able to accept that that might be good enough to just accept that you are where you are, and then like Michaela had mentioned, I love that saying the you only had to improve from where you were yesterday type of thing, because it's that same thing, bite-sized management things. It doesn't have to be those grand achievements that make things worth it for you. It can just be those small increments and taking that step at a time, and then recognizing like, oh my God, I started here and I finished here, and that those are and of course there are many other ways that we can combat or think about imposter syndrome, because it is such a it's a thing that affects all fields and all people, and being able to recognize that idea that it affects everybody is just the starting point. Like, you aren't alone, and definitely reach out to others in your field or just friends and colleagues or family members and talk it through with them, because they'll definitely have a different perspective than you do. Those they see you more authentically than you see yourself, because we're constantly looking at ourselves and judging like, oh, I messed up that passage in music. And I think it's great that other people that listen to it, they may not know that you messed it up. All they heard was beautiful sounds, you know. And I think especially for performances, we're constantly thinking about what we played, like we know the music in and out. But the audience that we play the music for, who are there to hear us play and perform, they're just here to enjoy it. And the fact that you're able to play a concert for them, and that sometimes even bringing them to tears or like helping them like just express musically anything like that, is enough. And like seeing those people come after the show, after performances, walk up to you like, oh my God, that was amazing. Take that as a compliment. It's okay to take those successes and not think about like, oh, but I messed up here, I messed up at letter K, or I didn't play there. It's they didn't hear that. All they heard was what you were able to do and how you made them feel, and just being reassured that that sometimes is okay. Definitely still improve, but take those victories and take those moments of like of compliment and praise, because if you don't, then you're just constantly gonna be spiraling in this path of like, oh, I'm never gonna be good enough, when in reality sometimes you're good enough where you are, and maybe take it one step at a time from there. And kind of with that note, that will sum up our podcast for today. And like me, Michaela and I have stated, there are so many different variations to what people feel with imposter syndrome. We'd mentioned a few of our own backgrounds and some of the things that we've heard from our colleagues and our peers. Um, but down in the description or the whatever however you're watching this below, we'll have some links to some blogs, to some studies, and some things that we kind of read through and studied to prepare for this podcast, and also some videos that we looked into to kind of help hopefully help others kind of manage things because there were a lot of topics with it being such a grand thing. There are a lot of things that we couldn't fully hit on
Yeah,
that I think are still very important for anybody who is currently struggling through imposter phenomenon or just kind of thinking that they're not where they should be type of thing. Definitely
yeah.
give those resources a read.
And again, it's imposter syndrome is not a psychological disorder, but it can lead to other that like it can play into other things, or perhaps it could even be a sign of other things going on if it really, really persists. But know that you're not alone in feeling these things and thinking these things. Uh, if it becomes something that's just kind of bigger than you can handle, definitely speak to more people about it and
Mhm.
reach out to people who know more than Jason and I do.
Yes, of course. But I also wanted, before we ended, I want to say thank you to everybody for giving us such a amazing kind of season two, our first episode that came out 2 weeks ago, kind of viewership and kind of thanks and premiere for that. It was great, seeing people comment and give us some feedback on that, and just seeing the audience that we have created. So thank you so much for that. Um, Michaela, are you still there? Sorry, my
I'm here
internet.
now.
Okay, cool. Hopefully that if you were able to hear that. But yeah, so thank you so much. Michaela, anything to finish
We
us
will
off?
see you next time. Keep on making music.
Yes, see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye.